This episode of the Out of Bounds podcast is sponsored by Fisher Skis, and you can visit them at www.fishersports.com. Hello. This is the Out of Bounds podcast. My name is Adam Jabber, and we have a really good episode for you today with Phil Henderson. Phil organized and spearheaded the first all-black team to Summit Everest. More importantly, he's somebody that I really admire, and I really admire the way that he's used his platform to just talk about his life experiences. And I think we kind of go into detail about what that means and what that looks like for him. And we just have a really good conversation about what representation looks like in the outdoors, why it means so much to him, and why it's important in general, like why it matters for somebody, a person of color or whatever, to see somebody like them out in the outdoors. Like obviously it's something I've talked about before. It's something that really matters to me genuinely in my own life. But it was nice to get to talk to Phil in a really open and kind of comfortable conversation about something that maybe is uncomfortable for a lot of people to talk about, but it was really cool. So thank you to Phil. I can't thank him enough. Obviously the guests make this show happen. They make everything work, and that is no different today. And honestly, I hope it's never any different than the way it is right now. So, better and better. Moving along, we have the gear guide. Actually, this might be the week it drops. Right, Ethan? It'll be right around this time. If it's not this week, it's next week. We have a new gear guide. We've talked about it a little bit before, and I've posted on it now, and people have seen the cover, which is the best, pound for pound, the best gear guide cover I think that's ever existed. I will make that claim now, because I actually think it is the best. Thank you to everybody that supported that thing. And thank you to everybody who's going to buy it, because I think people are going to buy it because it is the shit. It genuinely is. It's really cool, and not because I wrote a bunch of the reviews. That actually is probably the shittiest part, and not in a good way. The best part of it is all the contributors, from Shane McFalls doing all the cover pages. Cy Whitling did a very cool back inside cover with a checklist that you guys will see once you get it in hand, and then we'll sell little like peely things for you to keep with you when you're doing your outdoor adventures. And tons of great contributors for gear reviews. We did a slightly different style than what we normally do, where it's basically just, we're doing this, like, I don't know, I wanted people to talk about the setups that they actually ski and not some shit that they skied on a random icy day on some resort that they're uncomfortable with on a ski they've never skied before, right? So there is some of that for sure on stuff that I've tested and spent some time on, and stuff that I just like for one reason or the other. But the stuff that's really important are the 6 or 7 or 8 guest contributions that came from people who actually talk about the gear that they really like and why they like skiing this stuff and how it makes them feel, most importantly. So gear guide number 1, the first ever, very unique. There is no other gear guide like it in skiing or probably in outdoors. Support us as much as you can. I really appreciate it. We all appreciate it. And we'd love to keep making cool shit that you actually want to support. So more on that later. I'm sure I'll blow up everybody's feeds on that as it gets closer and closer. For now, we have to pay the bills. And this is a reminder that if you would like to listen to the news bit, that's cool. That'll come right after this. But if you don't want to listen to it, we will include the timestamps to the episode start before we actually get into the show. So without further ado, we have our sponsors. And we have apparently Rumpl as a sponsor for this show. Ethan switched up all of the ads that I was prepared for in the beginning of this episode.
I did read the wrong ones.
You did read the wrong ones. Thank you very much. I very much appreciate that. Rumpl is, as I've said before, one of my favorite sponsors, period, point blank, because they just make cool shit that you wouldn't think you need, but you actually probably need. They make the best puffy blankets. That's the number one selling item. And they also do collaborations with, it's called the Rumpl Artist series, Rumpl Artist Design, Rumpl, I don't know. Either way, they have artists design their blankets, like the one behind me from Brooklyn Bell. They're amazing. They look so good. Past guest Rachel Pohl also did one that is it's one of the most beautiful pieces of art that I've ever seen on anything printed. It looks so good. So go check out that stuff on Rumpl's website. They also make these cool little beer blankets. They make an everywhere towel that's really nice. And honestly, that's what I've been keeping my feet clean with for the majority of this darn tough sock challenge situation. So that's been great. Go to Rumpl.com, use promo code OUTOFBOUNDS, and you can save yourself 15%, 20%, something like that on Rumpl's website. And honestly, just support the show. Use the code OUTOFBOUNDS on Rumpl.com. This is a thing that you actually really could use if you're spending overnight time in the backcountry, if you're sleeping in your van. It packs up really small, totally worth the investment. And I've camped with it a ton. It really makes a world of difference. So Rumpl.com, promo code OUTOFBOUNDS, save some money. Next we have our friends at Darn Tough. As has been tested, I'm assuming this is over by the point that you're listening to this. I wore these socks for 55 days in a row, barring any unforeseen circumstances like my dog eating my socks or my feet disintegrating into thin air. I've worn these socks for 55 days in a row without washing them and doing an activity every single day. And they look pretty damn good. So if you can do that, you can do anything in a pair of Darn Tough socks. Micro Crew is the one that I was wearing for a long time. Huge fan. We all wear Darn Tough. We all wore Darn Tough before they were a sponsor of the show. And now we have created a somewhat of a cult for these socks. So ski season is upon us. Get enough socks so that you do not have to worry about having enough socks for the ski season. Go to darntough.com and keep your feet comfy and clean, even if you wear them for weeks and weeks at a time. Cool. Without further ado, again, I guess there was an ado before, but now there's not. My friend, Phil Henderson. Phil, first, very good to have you. Who are you? Tell people a little bit about yourself, and then we'll kind of kick it off from there.
Wow, just a little bit. Yeah, my name's Phil Henderson. Currently, I live in Southwest Colorado. I'm in Cortez, Colorado.
Cool.
Originally from San Diego, California, but I've lived in various places in the Rockies and spent a couple years in Patagonia, a couple years in East Africa and Kenya.
Yep.
Just traveling around. That's what the outdoor industry has done for me. It's been awesome. Yeah.
That's great. So obviously recent expedition, first all black team to summit Everest. That's kind of been like the big story, I feel like, for the spring for you. And I'm sure for, the years leading up to that, to get that thing all prepped out. Why don't we start off and tell people a little bit about that, what that experience was like, why you wanted to do it. And then we'll kind of work our way backwards from there.
Yeah, that Everest 2022. That for one, the story itself kind of came out of kind of my life in a sense, and having the lack of representation out there. And then when I met Conrad and went to Nepal for the first time and really connected with folks from Nepal, and you kind of just built community there. And then when I went to Everest in 2012, and that really in that time between 2006 and 12 was the first time I even ever really thought about going to Everest at all. And then I got the opportunity, and then again, just years of going to Nepal and not seeing other people that look like me. It was like, man, I'd like to change that. And then I moved to Patagonia. I came back, and then there was this group of people that we either ran into each other or Conrad had been mentoring and kind of, getting out and climbing and so on. And before you know it, we kind of had a team that could talk about the possibility, and we just made it happen. So, yeah.
What was it like? So what's for people that are unfamiliar, what's the process of getting that set up? What is it even like to decide you're going to Everest? I think is one thing. What are some of the logistics, the hoops you have to jump through? I feel like Everest gets talked about all the time, but there hasn't been very many people that have actually summited Everest in general, right? It's like 10,000 people total or something like that. And then like 10 African-American people ever had summited up until this point, and now it's up to 19 or something like that, right?
Yeah, so we can go back and I mean numbers. Who knows? And
Right.
yeah,
Exactly.
people are keeping track and that, but that's a good part of the Everest story too. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted people to go so we could really talk about it and some of the things that are underlying about Everest. But they keep records, and I'm forgetting the woman's name right now. Then she was ahead of that for a long time, and she passed, and they're still doing it. So that's some kind of some of the behind the scenes things that leaders of expeditions have to do. They have to talk to people and give stats of names and team members and that kind of stuff, so that they can keep records. But there's been about 6,000 people, or a little over 6,000 people in general who have summited Everest.
Okay.
The 10,000 comes because there's multiple people who have
Got it.
who have summited multiple times, and most of those people are Sherpa.
Right.
You have Sherpas that have summited Everest between either 5 and 20 times.
Right.
There's a lot of who fit that, who fall in that category, and so they can kind of make up the other couple thousand in that sense. In terms of Black people, it's just Black people around the world, period. And
Right.
then of course, so that's Africa, South Africa, around the world, Black Americans, not all Black Americans. So we're just talking 10 people around the world who are Black people, is what it was up until 2022.
Yep.
And putting it together, I mean, there's a lot that comes into it. And given the fact that we started the expedition before the pandemic, before uh, we had a yet another kind of social uprising in the United States, behind George Floyd murders and so on. And so I think it's just important for people to know that, because this expedition wasn't a reaction to that. It just was, our paths happened to come all together at one moment just prior to that, but it all resonates, and it came at a good time to say, hey, world, wake up.
Right.
Right. And to a lot of different things, things that go on in our society, or things that are happening to all over the globe, which is a pandemic, or the fact that mountaineering isn't seen for Black people, in this country yet, around the world. Did we put it together for that reason? No. It just so happens that we were all skilled enough and experienced enough at this time, and our lives kind of came together, and we're like, yo, let's do it. And that process is kind of, you have some people, and it's not like being in a classroom, right, where you want to raise your hand and say, does everybody agree? And that's where commitment. But then how much can you get anyone to commit when you're not all together in the same room for the next year? You're around the country, and training has to be done on your own, and you have no money. And the industry is coming out of a pandemic, and supply chain issues are crazy. And you're trying to convince people to, hey, fund this expedition of 10 Black people, or a group of Black people who want to go climb Everest. It's not an easy thing to do in any senses. So, but we managed to do it. To make a long story short, we managed to do it, and in a year where we had good weather, and we had a great team, and we had a lot of support from a lot of players in the outdoor industry, and individuals. Our GoFundMe was really strong. So put all that together, man, and the bottom line is, what I've always tried to do personally is just make a positive difference in the world, and feel like we were able to put that together with climbing one of the highest mountains in the world, or the highest mountain in the world,
Yeah.
uh, and be successful at it. So shit, enough said for that. I mean, I don't know what else to say. You know what I mean? Yeah,
It's incredible, man. It's really, I think one of the things that people don't necessarily understand about Everest too is like, you don't get to just go. Like, it's more complicated than just like training a little bit and just going, right?
yeah, yeah, and it was, again, it was, getting funding, and um, financial funding, and in terms of equipment for, for a group, but we also included our Sherpa team in that as well. We were all one team. And so there's a lot of logistics that goes behind that. As a team, we were meeting, once a week. We had Zoom calls once a week for more than a year,
No kidding.
just to kind of stay connected, and talk about some of the things, talk about training or, talk about equipment, who's going to be getting what, and, getting all those things sent around to different people. And we did a training trip to Nepal in January, thanks to our sponsors, and a big one at that time was the Alex Lowe Foundation, the climate Kungu climbing school. And so it was just, there's a lot of moving parts that went to make the whole thing happen. It would take us forever to talk about all of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Can you talk a little bit, I guess, about the trust aspect of getting together a team like that, and how you get a group together and be reliant on other people to that level? Because I think that that's something that's really important to have when you're doing any alpine adventure. Like, you have to trust your
Yeah.
partners when you're doing that kind of thing. And I guess if you're doing
Yeah.
a year worth of Zoom calls, you build some of that, but that in-person experience is really important. And I don't know how well you knew these other people that were going on this with you, but there's a lot
Yeah.
to it, man. Like,
Oh,
that
yeah.
would stress me out more than anything, I think.
It's like we all knew pretty much of each other in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
Not everybody knew each other, but we were connected to one or two people. And over a 3-year period, we did a trip to Highlight Canyon. Not everybody was there, but some of us were there for that one. We did a trip to Rainier. All of us were there except one, I think. We did a trip to Nepal in January, which then it, which then included our the members of our Sherpa team that were already in Nepal as well. And so all of that is a part of taking away that non-structure of a team, and taking away some of that anxiety that people may have of not knowing folks. It's like we spend a fair amount of time together, to be honest, and then you add in the Zoom calls over
Right.
that period of time, and then the fact that, let's see, um I think Rosemary came by, stopped by my house, because Rosemary and I had been on 3 mountains together before anyway. We'd been together on Denali, we'd been together on Kilimanjaro, and we spent time in Chile. And so that relationship is there. KG and I had spent time in the mountains together in Kenya. The three of us had worked for Knoll, so we know somewhat of what we're all bringing to the mountain, in a sense, right? Um, I spent time skiing with Eddie and climbing with Dom and Fred and Manoa, in Uray climbing ice, and so we all have kind of a connection there that helped strengthen that bond in general, right? Um, but then the biggest part really is, you have your Sherpa team as well, and
Mm.
the trip for us to go there in January was I think the most important part of that was to see and meet those folks, to
Right.
start that relationship with people from the Sherpa community, instead of us just showing up and saying, okay, here's this group and you guys are just going to be like everyone else, and you're just going to keep, we don't have a relationship,
Right.
that was super important for us. And so that January, that trip that we did really kind of helped, bring the two teams on two different continents together, so that when we were there in April, it was like already you're seeing friends that you knew from before, and
Yeah.
it worked out super well. Yeah.
Is that where it started to feel like real for you, I guess? Because that kind of stuff, you're building up to it, and then it starts to become tangible at a point.
Right. Yeah. So, it was a long process of fundraising,
Right.
and then pandemic. You didn't know if it was go or not, and then I kind of almost put it aside. It was like, let's just scrap this, because it was sometime in the middle of 2020, late 2020, I think, and like you just didn't know.
Right.
and and so we kept going, and kept with our meetings and so on. And it wasn't By the time we got to January, we had put in so much work but then it really became real. Like,
Right.
wow, we're on a plane, we're in Nepal right now. This is actually happening. And that's when it really became. So by the time we were there for the expedition in April, honestly, I feel like we had already been so successful to get to that point
Right.
that climbing the mountain and getting to base camp and climbing the mountain was probably the easiest part of the whole expedition.
Right. Yeah, the legwork is I can't even imagine. Like especially over the course of 2 years or whatever and going through the pandemic and dealing with all that and then trying to get people to actually like see a reason to give you money for it and then making it all work. There's so much that goes into it and so many pieces that
Yeah.
have to happen. And like I've talked a lot lately about just the luck aspect of things happening the way that you want them to happen, and I imagine that that's a big part of it for you guys too.
Man, I mean, you have to have a plan, but luck comes into play as well. And we were lucky with weather. Um, you know, so that's just it. And so everybody was lucky in that sense. All the expeditions, and it was a really good ever season in a sense. But yeah, your planning comes in, is dialed, but luck comes in there for
Right.
sure.
Right.
Yeah. It's Everest. I mean, yeah. And it's being in the mountains, for a long period of time with a large group of people. It's like luck comes into play for sure.
What was the biggest surprise to you as a group, I guess, when you were going through the process of actually summiting, right? When you're on the mountain, was there anything that came up that was unexpected or things that you were like, okay, this is hard or like we need to get through this part of it?
Well, shoot, well, first of all, just remember, it's like I didn't summit, right?
Right, right, right.
I stayed back, and so I think in communicating in radio during our summit push, the hardest thing was the fact that um, people had to descend from Camp 3 back to Camp 2 because of weather.
Okay. Right.
So when you're going up and you're like we're pushing, and all of a sudden you have to turn around and go down, that's hard. Um,
Right.
but you know, I've been through that many times,
Right.
and it's like that's just a part of the ball game. It's like it happens,
Yeah.
but it turned a hard thing into they just went back the next day because the weather changed, and the window was just a day later, and
Yeah.
you know everything was smooth. So that's where luck comes into play. It's like we were lucky that it was just a day,
Yeah.
right?
And I
You
get,
know,
yeah, that's kind of what I mean is like sometimes you're on these things and that stuff just happens and dealing with that
yeah.
and having to work backwards a bit is what is always really interesting to me. Like when that stuff happens, because obviously it's difficult, but the pushback and like the taking steps backwards is always harder, I think, than taking steps forward because you're
Oh
there and
yeah.
then you're like, let me work back and make this thing happen. That takes a lot of discipline, I think, from the whole team.
Yeah, and that's where hopefully, I mean, experience comes into play as well. And
Right.
not saying that everybody has that experience, but I know that some people on the team had, because they
Right.
know what it's like to have to retreat off of a mountain, or to wait out a storm or things like that. And so, yeah, it comes with you know with uh, with experience, and that was one of the good things is that we knew that we had a strong team that had been through some things, prior to going to Everest.
Right. Um, one of the things I wanted to talk to you most about is representation and what that means to you. It's talked about a lot now, and I listened to you talk about it in a video earlier today, actually, where you were just talking about the fact that it's important for people to see people like themselves out doing something. And this is a thing that I grew up. I'm Palestinian. Like I grew up like in a ski shop, and it's not. I don't know. You don't see a lot of other Palestinians and Arab people like skiing and doing stuff, and it's always like a weird. It's a weird thing, I think, especially like
Mm-hmm.
growing up in a shop. I kind of dealt with that a little bit, but and every time I talk about representation, I get some pushback from people that are like, why does it matter? Like who gives a shit? Right? Like who cares one way or the other if you see somebody like you doing it? If we're all equal and we're all doing the same, why should it matter? But it very much does matter, and it very much matters to me. And listening to you talk about how it's important kind of made me just I don't know, want to talk to you a little bit about why representation matters to you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, why it matters to me is that first I have to say it like this: like I didn't come into the industry like to say that
Right.
representation matters. What I'm going to do to
Right.
to change that. I came into the industry because I loved what I could do. I
Right.
love to ski. I love to climb. I like being in the mountains, and everything else came after that. Right? And it comes with the territory. Period. I don't bring it; it just
Right.
comes.
Right.
And so I can equally say on the other side, and if people could see this, then, for one, is like representation maybe doesn't matter to those because who don't have the problem of representation because they always see people like themselves. But if they can put themselves in someone else's shoes, and so, I have friends when I was living in Kenya who saw the difference. I'm not pointing it out to them, but they see how people treat me as as the majority when they're in the minority, right?
Right.
I'm no longer in the minority, and this was when I was living in Kenya. I was black and they were white, and it's just the nature of how people treated me and how they saw that as compared to how people treated me here in the U.S.
Right.
in the outdoor industry. I'm not talking about just in general. I'm talking about as a leader of an expedition, as a
Right.
team member of an expedition team or whatever. They see that, and so I have to ask those people. It's like, well, when you find yourselves being then in the minority, you could understand. But here's the thing, though. I also think that representation for me is as important as me as what I represent for them,
Right.
right? And the opportunities that there are. So I get this opportunity. I have this opportunity to learn about this other group of people, and that those people from these other groups have an opportunity to have an experience with someone different than themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then here's the other part of that is with singular representation, you don't always get that. You don't get the culture, right?
Right.
You don't get aspects of that you may get when you have multiple people from a different community or from different communities, period.
Yeah.
Okay. There's no dominance in there, you know. Um, and then I also think that the nature is it's it's an equalizer. So
Mm.
when you start to understand that as a group of people, if someone in the group is different, doesn't really matter because we all have to live together in the first. Anyways, we all rely on each other. We get to understand the things that we have in common just by the nature of we're spending time together outside for multiple days or doing something that we enjoy, right?
Yeah.
If you and I are skiing together, what's the commonality? The commonality is, man, we're having fun skiing.
Right.
That's it, right? Now we maybe talk about those other things, but we have enough enjoyment for this sport that nothing else really matters.
Yeah.
And if we can look at things like that with the things that we enjoy and find commonalities like that, then we can move away from why representation matters because we're all doing the same thing and we're enjoying each other's company doing those things.
Yeah. Yeah. That's that's, I think it's funny because it is a double-edged sword. It is so
Yeah.
important because without representation, you don't get that actual experience being in the mountains together and like doing that stuff. So like it never at no point does it become a level playing field. I think because of the way that the internet is, everybody thinks that like, everybody's on a pedestal, like preaching for this. But I think,
Right.
and to a certain extent, and we'll kind of get into this in a little bit, but it's really important for everybody to just go do the things that they want to do. And that's one of the most prevalent arguments that I hear is like, nobody's telling you to not go skiing because you're black, or nobody's telling you to not go skiing because you're whatever. Right. And that's where I find this argument to be it's a real, I hate the argument because it's just a lack of understanding, I think, that brings up that argument. But it's also, it's really important to kind of realize that, yeah, everybody should, we all can do this thing, right? I I actually talked to Vasu a few weeks ago, and he was saying, like, look, I am a disabled man, person of color, who wants to just go out and do the things that I love. And the reason that I'm using my platform to talk about these things is so that I can take up the space that's warranted right now. And as soon as there's somebody else like me that's out there and doing this thing, like, I don't need to take up this space because I just want to go out and do the things I enjoy and feel free to do those things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, and yeah, it becomes a place where we can authentically be ourselves, and and open up space for other people like us to just be.
yeah. You've been doing this for a long time. It's like you switched from playing football and having an injury, and then you started spending more time in the mountains. What was that initial experience like for you? Just going out and climbing, just going out and skiing, and doing these activities from doing, like, just playing traditional sports, right? Because if you don't start that until a little later in life, like, it's a weird. Anybody that I talk to, right? Like, I'm still in the ski shop a decent amount. Anybody I talk to that's going out for the first time skiing at like 18, 19, 20, whatever, I'm like, I almost want to like guard them and protect them from the like the entry point of these activities, because there's such a
Right.
weird learning curve to these sports, right? And to this industry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
So I mean, I don't know. I had a few friends that I went skiing with and so on, but when I started working in the industry, I just grew up by myself, you
huh.
know, and I just skied and that, you know,
And that was that.
um, yeah.
It's as simple
I
as
mean, I know it
that.
sounds crazy, but and then that's what opens up doors. It's like, and then you meet someone else and you ski with that person, and then
Right.
Um, I mean, I would ski by myself. I would go do backcountry trips by myself because I just didn't know people. I didn't
Right.
know anybody who did these things, but I jumped right in. I took a nose course, so I had that foundation. I wasn't afraid of it,
Right.
right? And so I just did it. But then I started, meeting people, and so then I had a group of friends that I could do things with here and there. But I was, I mean, this was the early '90s. You know
Right.
what I mean? And yeah, it wasn't people weren't talking about diversity, and this wasn't a thing, back then. And but yet, like, yeah, I'll give you an example. I had a friend of mine, Jim Faust, gave me the first job I ever had, actually outside of retail. I worked at REI, and Jim owned a whitewater rafting company. And I was interested. I asked him if he needed guides. He asked me if I had experience. We exchanged numbers. Make a long story short, took a trip down the river with him. He said, "Look, you can get 3 clean runs down the river. I'll give you work. I'm going to give you a boat. You got to get your own people to come down the river, your own people in your boat. I'll give you a boat, blah, blah, blah. You get 3 clean runs down the river. I'll give you work." And so I'm like scrambling around trying to look for people to go whitewater rafting with me. None of my friends to go because they'd never been whitewater rafting before. I got some people from the store to go at one point. I had a friend that was a teacher. I got some of her and her teacher friends. I got two runs down the river, and Jim called me one day. He's like, "Man, can you work this coming weekend?" And I said, "Yeah, I could, but I only got 2 runs." He's like, "Don't worry. The guide said you'll be fine." And he gave me work. He never we never talked about me being a black person. He never looked at me or
Right.
anything. None of the folks I ever worked with at that point did. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He just gave me work.
Yeah.
And I went into a group of people and we worked together.
Right.
Now, Now, here's the thing. This was in Oakdale, California, right? Because it was guiding on the Stanislaus River. So Oakdale was like my second home for the next 2 summers. But the group of folks that I worked with, Jim, who was from Oakdale, he ran a small business out of his home for the most part. We had a couple of other guys who were white, myself, and we had a guy who was from New Zealand, who was Maori from New Zealand. And we had a couple of pictures, but that was our crew for the most part, right? We just got along. We were raft guides. I learned a lot of things from them. We never talked about really the diversity we had within our team, but life was always like that for me. I had
Right.
friends from all over the place. Belize, Tonga, Mexico, Jamaica. That I've always had. We never talked about that, but then going to the outdoor industry is very different,
Mm-hmm.
right? So no, I didn't always have a crew of people I could do things with. But
Yeah.
then when I did, that whole crew of people I could do things with, to this day, I can probably name the number of Black people here in the US that I have done things with in the outdoors. I could name them right to you. I could give you the names right now.
Yeah.
That's how few,
Huh.
you know.
All right. We're interrupting this episode of the Out of Bounds podcast for a couple sponsors. Our friends at Gravity Grabber make the best ski storage solution that is available on planet Earth. Point blank. It is. It'll hold broomsticks. It'll hold snowboards. It'll hold poles. It'll hold whatever you want. A leaf blower probably, but most importantly, it'll hold your skis. Holds everything from a super rockered tip profile to something that is completely flat. With ease, and I have been alarmed at how much better our studio looks without skis just piled on top of my desk or in the office or just on the floor. It is extremely organized. Ethan is a psychopath when it comes to cleanliness and organization, and he's very happy. So if you like cleanliness, organization, and your skis hanging to dry as opposed to letting them rust in the back of your car in your toolie box, Gravity Grabber has you covered, and you can get a discount on Gravity Grabber products using promo code Out of Bounds. As usual, I don't remember what the discount code or what the discount number is, but I believe it's 20%. Out of Bounds at gravitygrabber.com. Appreciate it very much. And they're back. Function Wear. Function Wear is a sponsor of the Out of Bounds podcast. They make face masks. I mean, it's really as simple as that. They also make goggle covers. They make stuff for kids. They have a custom line. It's a hugely important product for any outdoor activities, and they make them in Colorado. It's a Colorado-based company. They have a lot of cool different prints, a lot of different styles to fit your stylistic needs and your swag. Function Wear is PHUNK Shun SHUN wear.com. Like function except spelled cooler. They have a great eco-friendly story. How do I even say that? How do I say that, Ethan? Eco-engineering story, according to their website. They're great. That's really all I can tell you is the stuff is breathable, and that's honestly my favorite part about it is how breathable the product is. Yeah, there you go. An average of 6 recycled bottles are used in each product. I feel like that's pretty freaking good for a face mask. So get yourself some Function Wear. Go to functionwear.com and use promo code Out of Bounds. Save yourself some money and get a thing that is completely essential to your outdoor experience. And now back to the episode with Phil Henderson. So I guess on that note, is it at that point, it was very much like, from what it sounds like, it was just, it was what it was. You didn't have to talk about it. It was what it was. And you guys just existed the same way you would doing any other activity, right? You have experience, do the job, end of story, right? That's,
Right.
I think that's a good thing. I don't, I don't love the like performative aspect of a lot of what ended up getting talked about, especially in 2020, right? You're following the George Floyd murders. Like everybody feels the need to like post on Instagram and tell everybody how much they care about one thing or the other, or one event, one cultural movement, and they attach everything that they're being to it, and there's a certain like performative bit to that. At the same time, I, I think it's really good, and I think so much of it is really genuine for people to like talk about their support and how they feel about certain things. It I guess where I'm going with this is it how do you feel one way or the other? Like where it wasn't a thing of even conversation, or where it's like every other conversation that seems to be had is focused on like diversity and ethnicity and where you come from and what gender you are, how you identify, like all this thing. Like it's a lot right now, man. Like it's like every other thing you see on the internet.
Is about diversity or something like that, is what you're saying.
Yeah, like every other, and again, like I'm not saying it's necessarily bad. I'm not saying it's necessarily good. There's good aspects and there's bad aspects to it.
I wouldn't say there's good. I wouldn't say good and bad. I would say it like I would put it like this: every pendulum swings to an extreme, right?
Right,
Everything you have that. Something comes up, like folks are way over here, folks are way over here. At some point things will settle. And why do things settle? Because people become educated. How do you educate? You talk, you
right,
communicate. So we need to talk about these things. We need to talk about them to the point where it's just, and but not just talk about it, but do something about it.
right,
Now, that's now the doing is what we need to do, right?
right,
And a part of that is, I mean, we do need to be educated about how to respect people. We've been trying to educate people. That's it. We try to educate people like that since the day they're born
right,
about respecting other people and how to treat other people. And, but we also have been removed from this connection we have with the natural environment. So you have these two extreme things really pulling us apart. We're trying to get things back together.
right,
And I've said this many times in that the outdoors is not just about this outdoor community. The outdoors is about our society and the global society, because all of us as people are connected to this planet that we live on.
yeah,
See? And we need to respect each of those things as individuals and this globe equally. And that's the only way that we move forward. So if we don't have the conversations about diversity and why we as Black people, I can't speak for other people, but as Black people, why are we disconnected from
right,
the environment, you know, or doing these activities, however way you want to put it, but but then how are we connected as well?
yeah,
How have we always been connected? And but also how do we view the outdoors, the industry that we see it right now? And me, again, I see things from a global perspective, not just from a Black perspective,
right,
because I have an opportunity to live in other places, not just visit, but live and understand, right? And talk to people and be able to speak their language. I'd spent 3 years in Patagonia in Chile. And oh yeah, I can tell you that me personally, there should never be a dam built in that country.
right, right,
Just the way I feel, right? And to see how the political structure and how people are there about that, or how women are a strong part of the political structure that we don't even have in the US. So you start to
right,
see so many different things. So again, I say that because I'm looking at things from a global standpoint, not just from a American standpoint, not just from a Black perspective. But I also have had the opportunity to live amongst and be amongst majority white people a lot of my life, right?
yeah,
But I've also had the opportunity to be amongst people from Mexico,
right.
right? And people from New Caledonia, if anyone even knows where that
I
is.
have no idea.
uh, um, and actually like understand these folks, you know what I mean, and know their cultures. Right now, I feel blessed I spend time working amongst people from the Navajo Nation,
Yep,
and to have that experience and to understand their culture more. See, the more we spend time with each other, the more we understand about each other, and the more we can move forward and understand why representation is important.
Yeah.
Right. So don't you can't tell me that you love culture and then not let me represent that culture.
Right.
I've said this a lot of time. People say, "Oh, I love culture." You don't have to go out of the country to get it.
Right.
You can experience different cultures right here, if you love it so much. Um, and a part of that is getting out and skiing, doing those things that you love to do and not having to go somewhere else to do it.
Yeah.
And experiencing other cultures is a part of that as well.
How so how do you actually gain that perspective? How do you gain a global perspective if people don't have the opportunity to go and live somewhere different and go and live at a different place? How do people get to that point where they can view a little bit of everything, right? Like that's a thing that I think I agree with you is really really important, and it gives you a different lens to look at, right? And you've had that opportunity to do that. So how do other people
Right.
get to that way? Because everybody's so focused, and I'm sure both of us at the same point, many days are focused on the day, right? They're focused on what they have to get through in the individual day. They're not worried about the culture aspect of it. They're not worried about the world. They're not worried about everything on an everyday basis. It's extremely stressful, and it's a lot, man. So how do people gain that
Because
perspective?
well, you have to let people be who they are, right? Embrace what they bring, right? Not that they have to assimilate. Let them hang on to their culture and bring that and share that with you, right? Um, that's the biggest thing you can do, right?
Right. Is just let
Just let
people be
people,
themselves.
right? But here's the other thing too, and it's a good question you have, and I don't know how. I guess you how things will go, and I don't know if we're live or not. But anyways, this is also, I think, this is my thought in a sense, in that, and I've gotten to this point because what always works for you doesn't work for me,
Hmm.
right? The systems we have don't even we don't even address systems and how they are that and how they can open up and make room in even a workplace. I'm going to give you a good example. If in the workplace you talk about the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion,
Hmm.
and how that's at the forefront of the values of which you run your business or your organization, whatever, then how important is it for me or you and I to actually have a conversation about that on work time when you won't get it anywhere else when you leave work because there's no culture outside of your work.
Right.
There's no people who are different outside of your work. But you and I sit right next to each other and we might engage in conversation that takes us away from the day to day for 30 minutes or so.
Hmm.
Is that as important as 30 minutes that you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or is it only important when you say we're having a discussion tomorrow at 3 o'clock about diversity, equity, inclusion?
Mm. Yeah, I mean it's way more important to me when it just happens.
Exactly. And so you have to then make room for it to just happen. And then trust that your employees will do whatever it is and then open up the system so that they can do other things, because that might mean you have to work another 30 minutes or an
Right.
hour, right? But when you close the door and you say, sorry, you got to go home by 6 o'clock, you don't leave that hour for us to then continue us doing our work,
Right.
which then opens up the whole looking at the system and say, well, why don't we allow flexible hours for
Right.
employees, right?
That's a really interesting
So
point.
so, like, we really need to get down the nitty gritty of what are we talking about when it comes to
Right.
why representation is important or what is diversity, equity, and inclusion. But if you don't bring the voices to the table that can allow you to, or open up yourself to be able to look at something a little bit differently, you know. So that's my one of the things that I can say to a president, CEO, whatever, is to ask them to ask themselves. Don't You don't have to answer me, but how open are you to really doing something outside the box that's gonna really say that I support diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah.
Or I really, when I put something on there, it says on our website, I write a statement. It says we as an organization really support and value Black lives,
Right.
because that's what we just put on our that's because that's what we just put on our website.
Yeah.
May not be what you were looking for, but this is what I bring. You know what I mean? Because
Right.
I think we need to look at things differently. You know.
No, I love that. I think that that's kind of what I meant, right? Like it feels like sometimes you're going through whatever, you're scrolling through Instagram, you're going on Twitter, whatever social media you choose, and you're like, okay, this feels weird. Like you're just saying stuff, and I think that that's where I think talking about it's really important, but I think talking about it in a way that just feels like you're talking about it is my
Right, right,
it's
yeah.
the only way
Not
that
just
I care
making a
to.
statement about it.
Yeah, right. Like you're not just like posting some shit on your story. You actually like are engaging in conversation for no other reason to just than to just have the conversation and because it matters to you. I think that's I didn't even think about the workplace aspect of it and the flexible hours and that kind of thing. Like that's a perspective that I didn't have, but I can tell you the value of being able to just like do to work as you're comfortable working and to like be able to like have those flexible hours, right? Everybody has to have a job and everybody has to work, but we're in this point where so many people are starting to head back into an office from working remote, and some people are very resistant to that, and I actually think that employers should encourage people working the way that's most effective for them, because whether it's in the office or working remote, and you're putting yourself in that space to be most functional as an employee, and in that space to be more connected with your community, right? If that means you're working from a park bench somewhere, I think that's fine. I think if you're working in an office and you get to have those types of conversations in your office place, then that's great. But like the sit down and put your head down and just like get the like check off every day's box is kind of a shitty way to live, right? Like in general.
Yeah, and you have to look at it too. It's one, like you say, it's one thing to make statements on any, social media platform, but it's something different to actually spend time like with people, like, getting out, and you may have to go out of your way. You may have to go, you know what? And tomorrow I I don't get this opportunity that often, so I'm gonna spend some time with Philip, and I'm just gonna stop by his house. We're gonna sit down and have a glass of wine and just talk.
Right.
But it's easy to just go home
Right.
and then do another Instagram post tomorrow about how you're supporting diversity at
Right.
work, because you went through this workshop that you learned a lot, but then you won't take the time to spend an hour with someone who's diverse,
Right.
from a different culture, to just say, hey, and then build, because when you do that, you build relationship. But that's what the outdoors has always done. So you see, that's why I see it's
Mm.
an equalizer, because when you're put into it, you don't have a choice. You're there, you know, you're on a ski trip just because people is our enjoyment of ski is skiing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that, again, this representation does, right?
Yeah.
But we have to, but if we only have this within our own, if our community is only this and doesn't have any diversity to it within it, that just happens naturally, then is when these things start. So it's like, if you start with let's say, the ski community, okay, how can we even help to have these conversations? Well, let's put together a ski trip where folks are hiking and spending their nights in a hut together and having conversation about anything. Doesn't have to be focused toward diversity, but I can almost guarantee you that if you put enough people who come from different aspects of of society that there are going to be some different conversations outside of just ski.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's funny. Everybody knows that just taking an online avalanche course or an online climbing course is not the same as doing it, right? But then when we have these discussions, people don't necessarily understand that, like, yeah, you can take a diversity training course, at your job or whatever they call it, but that doesn't give you that real life in person experience. It just tells you what's on the sheet. And it's the same thing in a lot of ways. Like you're not existing in real life. You're not actually putting those lessons into practice. It's like you forget it. Like I don't know. I did algebra in 8th grade. I couldn't tell you shit about algebra right now because I didn't do it. I don't know any of that stuff because it's not my reality. It's not my life.
So why does so the question again becomes, why does representation matter? Because representation brings representation.
Right.
Right. With without it, then you the perspectives that you get become the same without representative from different aspects of our culture. And again, my culture is a global culture.
Yeah.
Not just, our society. And that's a gift that I've been given, but it's the gift that I say that I know that is a true piece of the solution when we come to talk about why these things are important. Why is representation important? Why is diversity is important? Well, I've lived through that in enough places and to understand the why,
Right. So, and this is maybe this is a shitty question, I don't know, but I'm genuinely curious. How do we promote that level of representation in a way that is genuine, right? Like how do we get people that come from any different background to want to participate in things like skiing and things like climbing and in the outdoor industry as a whole, right? What is that next step? How do we make that kind of leap from like, yes, here's some representation. Does it just happen? Right? Like, I don't know.
No. And again, I believe this is this is just me again,
Right.
my piece of the puzzle. But, if you can genuinely have diversity and representation within anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which means that you find a way to bring in enough people that they're happy. They don't feel like they're being used,
Right.
or manipulate anything, right? And so this folks from the outside, wow, there's that person, that person, that person. They look like they're having a good time. I want to be a part of that.
Right. Right.
Right.
Changing that
And
stigma is weird though. Like it's a weird thing to do. Like I can tell you from my experience, right? Like I've taken my uncle skiing, like very, very Arab men that came over like 10 years ago or something like that. And every time I take them skiing, they're like, fuck this shit. Arab people don't go skiing. End of story, right? So they have this kind of stigma within themselves. And that's where I'm like, this is like, I'm like fighting this uphill battle and they don't even want to go down the whole mountain sometimes. Sometimes they'll go like, 4 turns and then they're walking down the hill because they have it in their head. And these are my family, right? And I'm like, this is what I've done my whole life. And it's so hard to get people that I'm the closest with to come out and try something new and be uncomfortable because they don't feel like it's their element. And maybe to a certain extent it's hard to do anything that's uncomfortable, but
it's funny. So I will, and I think because we're really talking like skiing, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, the National Brotherhood of Skiers has been around for 50 years, something like that. I don't know exactly. I'm not a member of any club or anything like that, but I can consciously say that they bring a level of representation that's almost unheard of in any other non-traditional activity. It what it brings to this to the ski industry is fun, uh, 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 energy, um, representation, and something that says that this is for all. And
Mm-hmm.
what we do is for all, but we bring what we bring. And I don't know if you've ever been to any event on the National Brotherhood of Skiers, but I think it's a good example of what large scale representation looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And but they have a a small gathering here. They have a summit once a year. Okay. I don't go skiing at those events all the time, but when I do, it's it 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 I see so many people from all over wherever they are just having a good time,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then the rest of the year, or maybe even be 2 years or 5 years before I go to another NBS event, I'll still go out and ski, but
Yeah.
I know that they have had this impact on people around. And so even when people see me out skiing, they have a different perspective now on a black person skiing,
Right.
right? Or if I'm out skiing and I'm working with a friend and we're um, doing transceiver practice or digging a pit or something, and someone sees that, right? I am a representative of not only a skier, but a black skier. So the next time someone sees that, it may not be such a novelty to them, it just becomes the norm.
Mm-hmm.
When they see enough of us doing that, yes, it's just the norm. So it's not a strange thing anymore.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
Novelty's probably a good word to it, I guess. Like that's
Yeah.
yeah. I guess it's just finding a way to do those kind of things, and maybe that's a good example of a group that has made it easy for people to just go out and do these kind of things. Like do these kind of like niche outdoor sports.
Mm-hmm. And so we can, climbing could be the same. It just needs to be enough representation
Mm,
in a positive way that brings that, and it's represented within the industry in a positive way. You
yeah.
know,
Yeah, for sure.
not positive on your terms, what you say is positive, but for us, that brings us in the door.
Right.
You know, helps us understand that we're comfortable here, right? And
Yeah.
we're gonna go enjoy this activity. Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a lot of things. It's like I don't know. I grew up in a household where anybody was welcome to come, and anybody that needed anything was welcome to come.
Yeah,
Right? Like you can
right.
come over and you can have
Right.
dinner with us at any point in the week, right? Like you could be
Yeah,
someone we don't talk to
exactly.
for years. Like come for dinner and you're treated
Yeah,
like the same as like your family. Like even if we never see you,
yeah.
like that experience is
No
the
one
same.
gets turned away. You can
No,
be the
yeah,
friend of a friend,
exactly.
right?
You
And
could
no
be
one
someone I
gets
don't
turned
even
away. You're
like.
welcome.
Right,
Right,
exactly. I've watched
right,
my father have
right.
people over that he genuinely does not like or agree with in any way and just have them over and have a
Sure.
conversation. And I think that part is it's almost more important when it's somebody that you don't necessarily see eye to eye with, and or somebody that you don't understand at all. Like those
Right. And
conversations make a lot
so,
more progression.
it's good for me to hear you say that because I've used that as an analogy in a lot of times in that in my household I can only speak for my household,
Mm-hmm.
right, which is my the way that I grew up here in the United States. But no one would ever get turned away for
Mm-hmm.
for if you come, you eat. If you're my daughter's boyfriend, doesn't matter what you look like, that's who you've chosen. So that's who's here. Nobody's gonna get out of here, blah blah blah. We don't want you to know. So would you do the same thing outside of the home?
Mm-hmm.
Right? No, you treat people with that same level of dignity and respect and acknowledgement and all of those things, whether they're skiing or coming to your house for dinner.
Right.
Right? Make them feel welcome.
Yeah.
Welcome them, and then you give until they've given you a reason to not welcome them anymore.
Right. Right.
Right? And then it's understood, and it shouldn't be a mystery of why, right? Because there's a reason there. but
Yeah.
a lot of times when there's no reason, so right.
Yeah.
So when you so I always just go back to say when people say what why is representation matters, like why do we have to have a reason?
You know,
It's just
right.
it's because we're human beings,
Right.
right? Because we want to go and do something. Because we want to walk on this earth the way that we want, and that's whether included in this thing, whether that's something that you own or don't own, or that you do or don't do, whatever it is, we just want to have that same common level of entrance and respect to that entrance to be able to do things in life.
Right. Yeah. And I like that analogy where it's like, yeah, I mean, skiing in a way or outdoors or whether it's climbing, skiing, like snowboarding, like it really doesn't matter. That's your
Yeah,
analogy for a home. Like that's the analogy
right,
for like welcoming somebody into something that you do. It should be
right,
like if you need goggles, I'm giving you goggles. If you need a boot, I'll give you a boot. I don't. To me, it doesn't.
right.
I'm happy to. That actually makes me feel better than
Yeah,
me going out there with all my like new kit and you going out there as like you're on rentals and whatever you found in your closet that's warm enough, right? You get 10 pairs of sweatpants on. Like that doesn't necessarily it makes me feel much better to get somebody out there and treat them the way that I've learned.
right,
So,
right. You know what? Because when I win,
right.
and
Exactly.
when you're comfortable, I'm more comfortable. You
Exactly.
know,
And now I have a friend that does something, right? Like that's the benefit for me is like now the next time I want to go, I don't have to like search through a Rolodex of people. I can just call this person that I know just had a good time and we can have a good time again or not. Like that part is like it's a nice thing for me to share that experience with somebody else and a lot of times that's what representation is for me
right,
often is being able to just go out there and feel that connection. Like that's how it happens.
right. Yeah, yeah. And so, again, I know we're talking skiing, but in that industry, in the outdoor industry, and to me, it's always just it's crossed all of those and into life as well. And
Yeah.
that's the biggest reason I think for representation in the outdoors is because that then transcends into our everyday lives as well. You
Yeah.
know.
Um, okay, last thing, and then I'll let you get out of here. There's somebody that has given us both money and a platform. So Snowbound, you're speaking at in November. So tell me a little bit about when you do these speaking engagements, and not necessarily just Snowbound. What what do you talk about, and what do you decide what you're going to talk about, and how do you decide what's important? Because I that would drive me crazy. Like, do you go into it with a plan? Do you go into it with an agenda? Do you go into it and you're just like, this is me. This is what I'm here to do.
No, I mean it really depends. It really depends. But to me, it all runs together. I can't talk about skiing and not talk about the lack of representation
Mm-hmm.
because I've been skiing for so many years and have like been that on on both sides, the positive side and the negative side of being a person of color in an industry where the best way I can say is people don't know what to think.
Right. Right.
But I've also worked my way through the industry to have accomplished enough things
Right.
to be able to that people don't have to think.
Right. 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 You just make it work.
You know, um, so I can have the conversation about a lot of things, and I say this a lot, and that I'm an outdoor professional. Yes, I have to go back and say we're talking skiing right now because I can also talk, about my experiences in the climbing community or in the boating community. Um, so many of those things, and so, but skiing it's the one thing that I like. It's the one thing that gets me up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
Right. I'll do that to go skiing. I'll do it to go climbing if I'm out in the mountains. But to get out of the house at 3 in the morning and go skiing and watch the sunrise, one of the
Right.
favorite things to do. And so it's easy for me to talk about skiing
Yeah.
and what it's done for me. And just the passion for it, but also it's like, but what's the future of it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Or
that's a scary conversation to have, is like, what's the future of it? What does it look like, and what's next? There's so many things impacting
yeah,
this. That's why, honestly, for me, that's one of the things that I like about this industry so much, but that is also so scary about this industry, is that it feels fleeting, and it is constantly fleeting. It's like you're relying on this weather thing. You're relying on this thing that is nature itself. It is like it's gone like that sometimes, and it changes overnight. And who knows where we'll be in 10 years, right? Like we have this climate change thing, and that's a real impacting factor for what a whole industry looks like, for a massive industry, and for a huge number of people that this is their thing, and it very well could be, permanently fleeting.
yeah. I mean, if we look at statistics and so on, well, which is again, go back and you say another reason for greater representation. So
Hmm.
the more people that we can have enjoying the sport, which is being, I think, pushed back for a number of reasons. Not only is our winters getting shorter, but things are getting more expensive across the board.
Yeah.
Um, but we need to educate people um, about what we can do as individuals across all lines to curb global warming or to educate people about climate change and what that means.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot there. Um, Phil, where can people find you on the internet? Where can people learn more about what you do? Where can if people want to connect with you, where do they get you?
Yeah. Phil underscore Henderson is my IG handle, or Full Circle EverestExpedition.com.
Okay,
Two places that you can find me. Yeah.
awesome. Or they can show up at your house for dinner, apparently. So that's good too.
Or you can show up at my house for dinner, man. But I mean, it's yeah, it's. I do have somewhat of an open door policy, and that's a whole nother conversation. You think about it. I had the conversation with a friend of mine not too long ago about when you're in Nepal, you're hiking like a trail, go past someone's front door, right?
Right.
They're doing their laundry, hanging their laundry out, and you're hiking. Would you allow that to happen at your house
Yeah. I mean, for me, yeah, but like
and be open with it? Yeah,
yeah, it is a weird thing. And it's funny because I know how I feel about it, and I know how I react, and I live at the bottom of a trailhead, a small mountain for sure, and it
yeah,
does happen to me,
yeah,
and I'm like, cool. But I'll go 5 minutes
yeah,
down the road to go to a mountain bike trailhead, and I'll feel weird that the trailhead is at someone's, literally in someone's yard, right? And then I'm like, I hope they don't mind. I hope it's not weird. I hope they're not like bothered by my presence here. Like, like you have that anxiety about it.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
um,
So yeah, it's a whole nother conversation,
right,
because I mean, even where I live, it's like I have people who will stop by because I have goats.
right.
Um,
That's awesome.
they don't know who lives here, and then it's like, okay, now here's a good uh, 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 um, example of why representation matters.
Yeah,
And I'm just a person, but those people don't know who they come and get out of the door. I walk out of the house. Oh, it's like, who am I representing? I'm representing a person that has goats.
right, right, right. Huh.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But in someone's eyes, whether it be my eyes or their eyes, wait a minute, there's something different here because this person doesn't look like me.
yeah,
But still, I'm just representing the guy with the goats. That's where your interest was. That's what we have in common. So why does it have to go any further than that?
yeah, yeah. It shouldn't have to. Yeah,
It doesn't,
just the
right?
guy, just the
You
guy with
know,
goats.
but right, or a skier is just the guy who's skiing.
Yeah,
And whatever level, whether they're at the entry level or whether they're at this level, doesn't really matter because if you're at this level up here, you at least wherever the level I'm at, I still remember being at that entry level,
Yeah.
right? But I also know what it's like to walk through these other levels of this thing, but having that same feeling as if I'm only at the entry level.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's I think there's really something beautiful about the simplicity in that though. Like, cause you're just focused on the thing that connects you. And I think that's kind of the end
Yeah,
goal, right? Like that's the end goal
yeah,
for this whole thing and this whole conversation is like, if it can be as
yeah.
simple as what you're doing right now, then nothing else should matter, but it does matter right now.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Or the 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 hill of which I go to ski doesn't really matter to me.
Yeah.
What matters is the fact that I get up and I get up off my ass and I go out and I do it.
Yeah.
And whether that mean if I'm just cross country skiing that day or if I'm hiking 200 feet or 2,000 feet doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
For sure.
And we can all represent that of just getting up and getting out.
Yeah, that's a goal. I think that should be a goal for a lot of people, right? And I mean, obviously, like no one gives a shit about what I think should be goals, but for me, that's important. It's an important step to get to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, um,
So
Phil,
good, man. Yeah.
this
This is
is
fun.
this has been great. I really appreciate the time.